Welcome to Homeschool Conversations with Humility and Doxology, a series of real-life interviews with moms, dads, and other educators. I'm Amy Sloan, a second-generation homeschooling mom of 5, and I'm so excited that you're here with me today. If you want to check out the show notes for this conversation or any of the previous episodes, you can head to humilityanddoxology.com. And today I'm so excited and delighted to get to chat with Brandy Vencel. Brandy, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This is fun. I'm excited.
Well, Brandy is a California native who imported her husband from Florida. Their 4 children, 3 of whom are teenagers, have always been homeschooled and always in a Charlotte Mason way. Brandy is the mind behind the Afterthoughts blog and host of the popular podcast and one of my personal favorites, School-A Sisters. You can find her Charlotte Mason resources and study guides, including information on her Charlotte Mason Bootcamp in her Afterthoughts shop. So, Brandy, in your bio, you say you guys have always homeschooled the Charlotte Mason way. So I want to hear about that. But first, just tell us a little bit about your family and your kids and how you even decided to start homeschooling.
Well, my kids, I'll tell you their ages first. So they are, well, I'll tell you their grades because I always mess up their ages. They are 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, and then 12th grade. We're actually graduating our first child in, what is that, 2.5 weeks, I guess. So we're at the end run with him.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's kind of strange time period to be doing this in. It's not exactly what we all expected, but it's fine. So goodness, how did I start homeschooling? I mean, really, I would say, I sort of vaguely knew homeschoolers growing up, but really the person who I would say first introduced me to real homeschooling and in a really positive way was our landlord when we first got married. So we lived in a town in LA County called Whittier, and it's like one of the older cities in the county. And so what they used to do was, like, when people would come out, they would first build kind of like an over the garage apartment. And then this is like the early 1900s, like I think our apartment was built in 1904, something like that. And so the family would then live in that apartment while they were building the main, like, old Victorian type of house that they were going to do in the front. So then as everything has aged there, they started renting out all these apartments. So lots of like young college couples were living in all these apartments in these garages. So we got to know our landlord pretty well because we shared a backyard, we shared a fence, all these different kinds of things. And they had adopted 6 children out of the foster care system. And they weren't currently homeschooling, but they had done a lot of homeschooling in the past. They were one of those families that kind of every year they kind of assessed the situation and did what they felt like they needed to do. They had a number of special needs kids. And so sometimes they really needed the therapies that they could get to the school. And so she always spoke so fondly of her time homeschooling. And I feel like, looking back, I didn't realize the impact she was making on me at the time, because I wasn't like, I thought, oh, I want to do that. It wasn't that kind of like love at first sight kind of thing. But I think she's the person who made me warm to it, because I just had never been around it before. Vaguely knew people did it, but I didn't know anyone who had done it. And so it was like it all came alive just through her living life with her kids. And the thing that stood out to me really was just that how close all the siblings were together. And then how close the parents seemed to be to the children. Like, they just had these really great relationships. And even though it was a large family, it didn't seem like anybody was lost in the shuffle or anything. And so I feel like, looking back, she's probably the person that really got us started. And I think it was a major thing that my husband was there too. It wasn't just an influence on me. We together were living there. And so he was getting to know the dad and had the same kind of positive experience. So I really think that's where it came from for us. But then Charlotte Mason, that's kind of a different story. Goodness, what I'm trying to think about what year this probably was. So I would say like 2004, 2003, somewhere in there. We got a computer with the internet.
Big deal.
Yeah. We were a modern family. And I didn't know a lot of moms. I didn't know a lot of moms who were thinking about homeschooling. And so I just kind of started reading some of those mommy blogs, and there were like 5 at the time. And one of them was Cindy Rollins. And so reading her, I feel like she really got me started on the path. I'm so thankful to her, because I think I would have floundered for a long time, but she was just so clear about the different things that she shared, and the way she shared it, I completely connected with. So she introduced me to Charlotte Mason, and for like my 26th birthday, my husband bought me the 6 volumes, and I still have them, though they're falling to pieces. And she introduced me to Ambleside. I mean, just all those different kinds of things. So my kids have always done Ambleside online. It's so funny. I remember looking at the website thinking, wow, this is amazing. I could never afford to do this. I had no idea it was free. So I was looking at these book lists thinking, gosh, this is amazing. If only I could have this. It's hilarious. So we've always done Ambleside. We've always done Charlotte Mason. And I really think it was Cindy Rollins. So I had a brief flirtation with some other philosophies just in reading and stuff, but it was never serious, because she was probably the primary influence on me at that time. So
it sounds like what kind of first drew you to homeschooling back from your landlord was really more like this relational aspect and this family dynamic that you saw. And then as you began researching, being drawn specifically to Charlotte Mason. And so what was it, do you think, about the Charlotte Mason approach to education that really stood out to you as you read it, like from Cindy and others?
I think that was love at first sight, really. Like when I opened up her book and started reading, I mean, I didn't understand everything I was reading at all, but I just remember recognizing it for the education that I wished I had, or the best parts of my own education. Like the things that stood out to me that were done right seemed so in line with what her principles were. And the things that were done wrong were out of line with her principles, in my opinion, just looking back on my own. And so it just, for me, it was one of those things where it was just this is how it should be moment. It just felt so in line with reality, with how people learn, with how I wanted my kids to learn. And I always loved to read. So I wanted them to have a relationship with books. So the relationships, that was there too. I wanted them to love reading if at all possible. And I felt like that would at least predispose them. It would give them the opportunity to fall in love with books, because so many kids, I feel like they're so rushed from place to place and class to class and thing to thing that there's not really time to fall in love with books. I mean, half of it really is just the time spent, like where we spend our time. So anyway, but yeah, so Charlotte Mason was, I used to say something controversial. I kind of got in trouble for it one time, but I used to say I invited Charlotte Mason into my heart. And apparently that's something you shouldn't say, but what I meant.
You can say it here, it's fine.
Okay, thanks. But it really was one of those moments where it was just recognition. That was my moment of, this is how things ought to be. So
it almost reminds me, of that is it the C.S. Lewis quote where he says, where you make a friend where it's someone else who you say, oh, like there you are, like you recognize your kind of perspective in someone else, and you thought you were the only person who felt that way, and there's that recognition. So it's almost like, even though Charlotte Mason, you don't know her in real life, there was almost like a friendship or a kinship of the heart that you kind of recognized.
I think so. I talked to someone one time who said all her best friends were dead because they were all, authors, no longer alive. And I thought, oh, it's so true. I mean, and that's how we connect with other people, right? When you meet someone else who's read the same book as you that you loved, there is, again, that recognition, that moment of, oh, you love this too. There's a camaraderie in that, I think.
Oh yeah. When I was in high school, I used to joke that all my crushes were either like dead guys or fictional characters. So I was like, my friends would call me Mrs. Chesterton.
Nice.
I was obsessed with Jiggy Chesterton. Or, if I had to have a fictional guy, I was like Lord Peter Wimsey, So it was fine because they're like either dead or fictional. It's totally
there
safe.
You go. Well, did you know the real Mrs. Chesterton was Charlotte Mason's secretary?
No way.
Yes.
You're blowing my mind. Okay.
She was stolen from the PNEU. So if you look through the old Parents Review, somewhere in there, you see, he actually wrote for the Parents Review a couple times. But if you look through it, you can find a place where she says goodbye to the secretary of the PNEU, and it's because she's leaving to marry Mr. Gilbert Chesterton. So
that is amazing. Okay, someone recommended a biography of Chesterton's wife to me recently.
Oh.
And I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but I'll have to find it. So if you have one, send it my way.
No, I would love to read that. So
all right, I'll find the title and
Yeah.
send it to you. Once my library's open back up, I'm going to try to get that and read it. I've bought too many books when I'm back at home and my libraries are closed. Well, let me ask you a question about sort of maybe misconceptions about Charlotte Mason philosophy. And I'll preface it by telling you a little bit about my background. So I sometimes say that I was classically educated before it was cool. Like before we called it classical education. My mom was heavily influenced by like For the Children's Sake and by other speakers she heard. And now looking back, I really recognize it very similar to the kind of classical education I'm giving to my own children.
Yeah.
But there was a time in my late teen years as I began reading and listening to other people that I very much judged how inferior and how this was not really classical education, because I was hearing these new things of, oh no, this is what classical education really is. And so I didn't recognize my own education in those lists. And, I had to be humbled and come back to a different understanding. But I feel like right now, Charlotte Mason terminology just gets thrown around the internet all over the place. And sometimes it's not like recognizable one to the other. So are there any things that you wish people really understood about Charlotte Mason education or common misconceptions that you see having kind of been in this world for a while?
Yeah, one that's come up for me just in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know if that's because there's something going on somewhere on social media that I don't know about. Sometimes that happens. I've got my head down and I'm like getting the same question for people. It turns out it's all from one source, but it is the perceived connection between Charlotte Mason and unschooling. And so I've come across that a lot where people say they're Charlotte Mason, and then when they tell me how they get their curriculum, it's completely child-led. And so then I have to have the uncomfortable discussion. It is not my job to correct everybody, but if the discussion goes on long enough, then I have to kind of bring it up. And I think what happens is we hear children are born persons, and then we add to that like the outdoorsiness, right, of nature study and observation and all of those things. And those can sometimes be meshed together into sort of like an unschooling that's adopted some of Charlotte Mason's terminology. But really, it's only one of her three tools, right? Because she had three tools of education: her atmosphere, discipline, and life. And life is the curriculum written by an adult. And discipline is the habit training, and atmosphere is more of that rightly relating to everything around you, following interests, being outside, like all of that kind of relationship building that is not directed by habit or curriculum is more the atmosphere part of it. And so I think it's, what I think it is I think it's just taking like a third of Charlotte Mason and saying this is Charlotte Mason, but really it's an incomplete view. Because what I find when people come in and take one of my classes or something, the unschoolers have like the best grasp of a child's personhood. Like they have a full respect. They're not controlling, like they're not having to fight like the type A smother mother type thing. There's so many benefits to it, but they're there because they feel like something's missing, and usually it's habit or a structured curriculum or something like that. So I feel like with Charlotte Mason, it always comes back to trying to get that grasp of all 20 principles, because it's sort of like, I used to say it was sort of like a view of God. And I don't mean to put philosophy on par with theology, but how we can focus on one attribute of God and get off kilter. Like if we just focus on his love or just focus on his justice or whatever, like it can get ugly really fast when we isolate one part of God as like favorite part of God and ignore the totality of an infinite and good God and all that entails. And I think her philosophy can kind of be like that. We can choose our favorites, but then quickly we get off balance and start to have problems. So I think lots of times, you'll find other people that like habit training is everything, right? and that's Charlotte Mason, but it's not if it's everything, or curriculum is everything, that's Charlotte Mason, but it's not if it's everything. I mean, so I feel like really all of our mistakes are made when we're isolating variables and not trying to bring everything into the whole and having the whole cloth fabric of what this philosophy really means. So
maybe focusing just on the things that come more naturally to us, or
yeah,
that feel like easier for our personality, and kind of ignoring the parts that aren't as
for sure.
natural.
I was not really an outdoor girl, so I so badly wanted it to just be books. Like just books and narration would have been fine with me. But that would have been an injustice to my children. So we had to learn to do things we didn't want to do. Well, they wanted to do it. It was me. I was the problem.
So often that's the case. It's not the kids who are the biggest problem in homeschool. It's the mom.
So true. So true. It's embarrassing sometimes.
Yes. Yes, it is. Okay. So what does that look like in real life? Because the Charlotte Mason philosophy is, I hear people who love it and describe it. It's wonderful. And then sometimes I wonder, okay, what does that look like in real life when you've got, a wide range of kids, or things are messy? So we have our ideals, right? How does that work itself out? Or how have you seen in your family that works itself out kind of in real life?
Well, I really think that having all the principles is to say that it works out in real life, because we have our ideals, which can turn into perfectionism, right? Or we can try to systematize it and turn it into a list. But eventually there's some sort of mental breakdown that happens because perfection has not been reached, or all the boxes have not been checked, or, whatever sort of reality sets in.
We're not the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And so it feels like, to me, like that's really where the rubber meets the road with the principles. If everything was perfect, then I really could just follow a list of procedures and rules and just do them, and everything would turn out fine. So I feel like that's what principles are for, really, is when we need to be creative or think outside the box or solve a problem or face a barrier or whatever. So I'm trying to think, like, what's a good example is when a child is overwhelmed by a lesson or something. Maybe it's possible people here have cried about math before. And I feel like when we take all of the principles, then we can do so much troubleshooting there. So I remember, for example, one time my current senior, when he was like in 7th grade, he got teen brain and I didn't realize it. And he finally came to me and he was like, I don't know what's happening to me, but I cannot focus on my math lesson and it's taking me forever to get through these assignments. And I was like, well, first of all, that's why I have that time number in the box. You're not supposed to actually do math for 90 minutes. But what we ended up doing was I had assumed that he could continue with what I considered a normal trajectory and work for about 40 minutes. And he could not focus for 40 minutes at a time. And this was weird to me because he had always been my hyper-focused child that could go longer than anybody else. But the second we broke it up into 2 separate lessons, so same amount of time, just different parts of the day, we kind of put them like as bookends in the day. He was totally like went through and was, streaming through his math, no problem. It was just too long for whatever reason. But I feel like, why did we know to do that? Well, it was the principles, right? Like we started to understand that attention was important and going beyond that was fruitless, and equipping them to be able to troubleshoot themselves meant trying to troubleshoot ourselves, right? And so anyway, it helped me because I think I could have gotten stuck in that box of like, well, the curriculum or so-and-so says that at this age, the math lesson has to be, this many minutes. And it was so freeing to look at my principles and say, that doesn't matter, because what really matters is this child's relationship with math and this child's ability to pay attention. And if I sacrifice either one of those things, then it's not going to matter that I did 40 minutes math or whatever minutes math, right? So so we don't cut subjects, but starting to use the principles to get creative so that we're not destroying relationships. To me, that's actually been the most exciting part of the whole thing, has been that her philosophy has equipped us to at least try to make wise decisions, because I felt very incompetent going into all this thing with this whole motherhood thing. Like I just was never I wasn't really a kid person. And so I never really knew what I was doing. I loved my children, but I didn't feel like one of those natural mother types. So having this framework, I feel like really helped me survive probably even normal motherhood, because I just didn't feel like I was naturally very good at it. So
I think that's so important. I love the distinction you were making between like the principles and the ideas is, even though we often like, well, they're in a list, you can like give the list of 20
Yeah.
principles or whatever, but it's they're ideas. They're not just a check off list that you follow. And so you're able to then interpret them with love and wisdom and relationship and your own children. That makes a whole lot more sense than
years ago. Lynn Bruce told me, she's one of the founders of Amplified Online, and she told me, philosophy is meant to be walked. It's not like something that you just, frame on your wall or something. And I don't know, it was like a light bulb turned on to me that like, this is something that I can get dirty with, right? Like I don't have to just keep it in this pristine, treasure cabinet or something over here, that it's meant to be mine, and it's a tool, it's a shovel. I can dig in the dirt with it and make life, fruitful. So it was a helpful picture for me when she said that.
And then there's some freedom too for different families to work out principles in slightly different ways, where they're still following and being faithful to an idea, a common idea, but it may look a little bit different in each household.
I think that's really a sign that something is living, and that it's a method and not a system. Because when we talk about systems, is that standardization, that's our modern factory mentality, right? That we can just like, if we put in all the right things, we get the widget we've designed out at the end, right? And it's just like the conveyor belt model. And so I feel like with method, if everybody looks the same, I would say that we've probably done something wrong, because we're working with persons, right? I was in a book group last night, and we were talking about this, that like we can say all these things about children in general, but at the end of the day, we have to deal with this child that's right in front of me right now that is hurting or mad or whatever is going on, So anyway.
Yeah, one time I wrote a post called "Homeschooling is not a vending machine," because I think a lot of times people think, we put our hope in our homeschool or our philosophy of education, and we think if I just push the right buttons, I'm going to get this right product out at the end. And really having to remember that the end result is up to the Lord, and we're not able to change our children's hearts. We cannot look to homeschooling for our ultimate hope.
Right.
That would be an idol.
Yeah. Well, really, also, even at 18, I'm realizing like, I'm not seeing a finished product. And was I a finished product at 18? No. Praise the Lord. Because I was in way worse shape than my child, I think. But I mean, really, it can be discouraging when we're in like this moment with this child. Sorry, I just had a memory, because at the breakfast table today, someone told me I gave them too much school yesterday. It took so long. And I was like, well, you did spend 90 minutes on emotions. So not cutting your schedule back, but anyway, I was thinking it's so easy to like get stuck in that moment and feel like something's going wrong. This is a disaster, and I'm not seeing, we want to demand fruit from the tree. I'm not seeing fruit, or I'm not seeing the finished product I want. And I'm thinking, I mean, yeah, we have ideals, and sometimes it can be devastating when we don't meet them, or we feel like I shouldn't say don't meet them, when we're so far from it that we're keenly aware of it. But at the same time, I feel like we're only seeing a moment in time. We're not seeing God's whole plan of everything. And all we can do is the best we can do to work with how he made the world. And I feel like these principles, I mean, she called them natural laws, right? She's thinking that this is the way the world works. And so we can either, work with the way God created minds and persons and the world, or we can work against it. And so I think at the end of the day, we say like the results, there's no guarantee of outcomes, but we have a sovereign God, and we know that he is infinitely good. And so we can trust him.
Yes. Exactly. One of my favorite verses is in 2 Timothy 2, I believe, and it says he cannot deny himself. And I just like cling to that as the ultimate hope for all things, including my homeschool, that ultimately I'm relying on the character of God.
Yeah.
And that is a great place to put our hope.
It is, especially when we know mom's the problem.
Yeah. Well, changing gears a little bit, you have written some on your blog about homeschooling as a low energy mom. And I know that I have many friends, and many of my readers are either themselves dealing with chronic illness or chronic fatigue or different health issues that can sometimes feel like such a discouragement when you have these things you want to accomplish in your homeschool, but you're face to face with the realities of a finite and fallen body.
Yeah.
So what would be some encouragement you would give to moms maybe struggling with that, or just some tips and strategies for keeping our homeschooling going?
I think probably the biggest turning point for me, so I had Lyme disease growing up, so I have like post-Lyme issues that go on. And I think the biggest thing for me was I had to reach a point where I could accept my own limitations. Like I wasn't going to be Susie, superstar homeschooler that took her kids on, amazing field trips and did all of these things. And I mean, yes, I wanted to do as many of those great educational activities that I could do, but I think having these unreasonable standards for myself that I needed to be like so-and-so who had super high energy, I think that was probably a big source of discouragement for me early on, was just, especially because, those early childhood years, people can be so amazing with all the art projects and all the things. But you know what, looking back, I also see an advantage because I didn't have the energy to like hyper schedule everybody or tell them what we were doing today. I see a huge amount of, I think, ingenuity and independence that resulted from that. So I couldn't plan all these art projects, but I could make sure they had supplies, right? So I had like the craft box with all the things or whatever. And we made sure they had time for that, And so I feel like it doesn't have to be either or. It's not, well, I don't have the energy to do art projects, so you don't get to do any. It can be, I have just enough energy to provide you with this resource and go and make merry, And so I like that some of it. I do think though, I have a doctor that I really like, and he says to me, time will tell the truth. And I have appreciated that about him because I have seen moms who they start some new product that is promising them, health and wealth. And some people do find products that turn their lives around. But I see some moms who are like, but they told me this was going to work. So I'm going to double my dose and I'm going to triple my dose and I'm going to go all in. I'm going to add this and I'm going to add that. And I love what my doctor always says. He says, time will tell the truth. So this will either work or it won't. And you will know. I mean, you won't know tomorrow. Things aren't magic. But if you're not seeing progress in 6 weeks, 6 months, like it doesn't mean that you pursue the same thing for 6 years. And so I don't know. It can be, there's so many people out there who want to offer you solutions, and often they also want to make a profit off of you. And it can be really hard to learn to navigate. So I feel like I had to become my own doctor, had to learn how to read research. But his paradigm of time will tell the truth helped me a lot because it realized at the end of the day, even the research didn't matter, because if it wasn't helping me, if it's 6 months later and I feel worse than when I started, there's probably a problem. So that was really helpful. So I feel like there's this balance of like, you have time and you have, limited time. You have only so much time, you have only so much money, and you have only so much energy to spend on fixing yourself. And I think you have to decide like what you're going to designate for that endeavor, and then let the rest go and learn to live life as well as you can with this, instead of, feeling like you have to just bankrupt the family. And I mean that kind of metaphorically, like it doesn't always happen with money, but it can happen with just like the spirit of the thing, because we just are so obsessed with trying to fix the problem. And I don't mean to minimize it. Like it is a problem. And when you can't get out of bed, that's super hard, but anything can become an idol, I guess, even our good health. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, it's a hard balance. But I always think like, it's true, never give up, but that doesn't mean make it an idol, and chase it down to the exhaustion of everyone and everything. So our kids, just like how I said with the art projects, I see like ingenuity and I see independence. I see these things in them. I think we talk about coming back to theology, right? And that verse that you rest in, I think when we think about, like, God says very clearly that all things work together, right? For according to his plan and for his purpose, for the good of those who love him. And that includes our children. So we feel like, oh, they're so shortchanged. They got this mom and she's so messed up, like, whose idea was this, right? But ultimately, he chose them to be my children, right? He chose your children to be your children. And so I always feel like we can cling to the fact that we are in the right place at the right time for his good purposes, whatever that means. And so it doesn't mean it's easy, but I also think it doesn't mean that everything has to be fixed, at least not right away. And I say that with trembling because I know how badly people want to get healthy, and I totally get it. But I just also know we still have to face Monday morning, and no matter what you do, you're probably not going to be better between now and Monday. So,
yeah, I just really appreciate that. I appreciate that perspective, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for people to hear that perspective from someone who's like there with them. It's not just someone who is perfectly healthy and full of energy telling them, oh, God will work this all for your good. But it's hard. Like,
yeah,
it's not easy, but God is there in the midst. And he's a redemptive God. So you think about like this fallen world,
yes,
pieces in so many ways. And yet we see him being gracious to work that redemptively, somewhat here on earth. And then, of course, ultimately our hope is not here.
So true.
Well, one of the things that I love that you talk about is continuing mother education, because classical education is for mamas too.
You're a person.
Yes, I'm a person too. Mothers are persons. We're born persons. What are some ways that moms can include some of that personal, maybe even we could call it their scole, in their day, in the middle of regular life? And then have there been any particular books that have been a tremendous impact to you as you've kind of done your own personal education?
Oh goodness, where do I start? Okay, I'll go back to the book list. Let's see. Well, okay, so the original mother culture article that I love is from the Parents Review, and it was like in the late 1800s, and I felt like the gal that wrote it, she just called herself A, so we don't even know her name. But I feel like she gave a very workable plan. So she says 30 minutes a day, make it a habit, do it most days. And she says have 3 kinds of books going, and you just pick up the book that you feel fit for. So you have like your harder book, you have kind of like, not like easy peasy, but you have your moderately easy, the book that you can read when you're weary or whatever. And you have a novel, and you pick up whichever one you feel like you can face. So if you are having a good day, maybe you do your hard book that day, but tomorrow maybe it's more of a novel kind of day or whatever. And I feel like that's been a really workable plan, though admittedly, there have been times in my life where even that couldn't happen, especially in an uninterrupted way, because I feel like the woman who wrote this probably didn't have 3 toddlers at one time. Maybe, just my hunch. But that does pass. Yeah. That does pass eventually. They don't stay toddlers forever, though some days feel like it. But I feel like that's a great framework, because I was the kind of person who thought I had to read for like 2 hours to have really read or something. And so getting past that was helpful. Another thing that was really helpful was when, I don't even remember who told me this, but it was verbal, face-to-face, some wise, godly woman. I was complaining about, reading my Bible and being interrupted by kids. And she was like, you realize when they come in, you could tell them to be quiet and finish reading it aloud instead of feeling like you have to be done. No, I didn't realize that. I had somehow internalized this as like this private activity that I was doing by myself. And if they were bothering me, then it was over or something. And so
my husband actually does that, because he gets up really early before anybody else, and he's down and he eats his breakfast and reads his Bible. And I love the memories I have of like when a little kid will come down and sit at the table and he'll just start reading out loud wherever he was. I think what a precious memory they're going to have.
Yes.
Of like, we would come down in the morning and there was Dad reading his Bible and he would read it to us. So
yeah. Yes. So, I took that and kind of ran with it. And I already was sort of into reading aloud, but then it was like reading aloud on steroids or something. Because I just thought, you know what? They want to listen. So why not just start reading really good things? And it doesn't mean every book I read to them when they were little was like an adult book, but it's funny, just, I don't know, about a month ago or something, I was reading Dante's Inferno, and I was, my fifth grader came out, and I just started reading it aloud because he was there and seemed incredibly bored. I think that was about 30 days into quarantine. So he probably was incredibly bored. At the end, he was like, wow, and I'm like, and I said, yeah, I told him a little bit about it as a poem. He's like, that's a poem? Like, yeah. So that's way better than those other poems you make me read, It was hilarious. But I thought, somebody told me that I could just finish up what I was doing and bring them in and let them join instead of feeling like, well, now you ruined my time. And that was sort of my attitude before that. So it's been, I think, hugely helpful for me to not feel like I'm having to choose either or. I mean, there have been times where we were really busy and I didn't really have time to read. And so I chose to read aloud, and it was something I wanted to read too. And that kept all of us sane, including Mom. So with that said, I do think there's a place for training kids not to interrupt and going ahead and having a time. So this boot camp I teach, I had a mom in there, and she, been homeschooling for like 30 years, raised, I don't know, like a dozen children. I mean, really experienced mom. And so she's finishing up with her last ones. And I'm like, why are you learning from me? I should be learning from you. I mean, granted, I'm really just the facilitator. They're reading Charlotte Mason, not me, but still. And, but what I realized was this was her survival plan, that like, she always has something going that she's doing. And she's, she is done with toddlers and babies, but man, if anybody paid her dues, it was her. And she has trained all of them that Mom studies her own things, for at least 45 minutes a day, and life will carry on while she's doing that. And it's just, so, I mean, really, she had older kids, but I could tell it was a long formed and long fought for habit. And, she was one of the most well-balanced moms at the end of that season. Like so many times, I think we've worn ourselves out by the time we are hitting that end run, especially people who have 10 children, or I actually think she had more than that. And so, I mean, that's a long marathon. And so she, just as like you would keep exercising and, eating food, she made sure she was still feeding her mind all those years. She was an amazing woman. I had so much respect for her. And I think, goodness, it's good for the children to see us being fully human, right? Like, what a great example she set for her kids, that they know that, Mom has a mind and she's willing to make that a priority for a bit of time every day. So
I heard someone say one time too, like, what kind of adulthood are we setting before our kids? We can be so focused on homeschooling them and like giving them this wonderful education so that you can then grow up and be like me. Like, well, are you presenting an adulthood of someone who is still engaged with big ideas and thoughts and interesting projects and creative and loving the Lord and loving other people, like all the things we emphasize with our children? Are we modeling for them that there is something to look forward to in adulthood?
I really,
really struck me because I want my kids, obviously, to ignore all of my sin.
Absolutely.
But I want them to be like, wow, Mom just looks like she just loves being our mom and loves just like being a human being. It must be really fun to be a grown up,
That's a good point. Yeah. They are probably more likely to want to grow up if we make it look a little appealing, because they're going to have to do it either way.
Right. Oh. I mean, there's hard work too, and they definitely just like cry or be tired. Like, I guess the full range of humanity,
Yeah.
Mothers are born persons too.
Yeah. I will say, like, for me, that habit of reading, and I've maintained it pretty well, though obviously there have been times, where it's fallen away for sure. But I really feel like it's helped me just not blow things out of proportion, I guess, is the best way to keep it. That when my kids were little, they were my whole world. They were everything, and they were all I had energy for. So my world was like this big. And so then when something went wrong, it was like my world was just devastated, right? And so it's like, I don't know, like bad things happen in the world and I'm like freaking out because someone spilled their milk or something ridiculous. I was so disproportionate. And I think young moms do that a lot. And I think it's just because it's just such this little tiny world. And so, if your world gets bigger, then those little things take on a smaller proportion. They're like a smaller percentage of what's important to you. And so I feel like, especially for those of us who have that tendency to like, I want to do a good job at this, right? So I'm going to make it my whole world. It's actually a lot of pressure to put on our small children. And so for me, it wasn't just about like feeding my intellect or being human. I really felt like it just gave me that broader perspective. I think that's probably why Charlotte Mason is so into broad reading, is because it really does lend that stability to your personhood, where you're not coming unhinged over tiny things because your world is big enough that you can totally handle it. So
it puts things in the right proportion.
Totally does.
If you have not yet read Missy Andrews' new memoir, it's called My Divine Comedy.
Ooh,
And
I have it.
Fantastic. And that was one of her the journey was, where do you put your identity as a homeschool mom, and the dangers of putting it in performancism is what she called it. But it's a beautiful memoir.
I'm totally going to buy it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, is there a particular book you're enjoying right now?
Well, there are many. I'm sort of a compulsive book reader. But I'll only say one. I'm reading, it's sort of an economics book. It's Antifragile by Nassim Taleb. And I've been working on this book for, I don't know, probably half a year. It's pretty big and thick. I like Taleb because he's really broadly read. So he might be talking economics, but he's going to tell you like the story of the emperor's new clothes and Greek mythology and Bible stories and all this stuff as he's going, because he's just one of those minds that's drawing on everything. But it's interesting reading it during this historical time, because he's talking about, the fragility of the world that we set up, and how businesses that look solid really aren't, and how events like what we're undergoing now can, reveal the weaknesses and break entire industries and all that kind of stuff. So his whole thing is with Antifragile is like how you can build up safeguards against, unforeseen events like this one. He calls them black swan events. But in the midst of all of this, I also see parallels with human persons, and how we can actually do things that we think are good for the persons in our lives, but that actually weaken them and make them not strong and make them vulnerable to bad things. Anyway, so it's been interesting to read it as a mother. I don't think I'm his target audience really at all. But definitely I feel like I'm coming away with, I don't know, there's like an old Parents Review article on grit. And I'm like, this is just grit, just at a different, like for a different audience, but it's the same kind of thing where I feel like he's showing me not just ways to protect yourself financially or that kind of thing, but really protect yourself in a more general sense, just from being, lacking courage or lacking strength. Anyway, so it's been fun. And it's fun, like I said, to read something that's nothing to do with homeschooling or not assigned for school.
Just because. Those are sometimes the best books. I'll add that to my ever-growing list of books to check out when the library opens.
He is really good. I was raised by a finance guy, so finance was like what we had to talk about at dinner for my whole life. But so I wasn't sure, like, can I read? I mean, will other women like this book? But I have now met a lot of women who love this book, so I think you will like it, because I wasn't sure. I didn't trust my ability to recommend it at first, but it's super good.
All right. Well, Brandy, where can folks find you online?
Really two places. So it'd be SchoolAsisters.com, and that's the website, that's the home of the podcast and membership site that we run. And then afterthoughtsblog.net, and that's my personal site where I write things that cause people to send me hate mail or whatever. So Only happens sometimes.
I'll have all of those things linked up in the show notes when this conversation publishes over at humilityanddoxology.com. Brandy, thanks so much for chatting with me. It was really fun to get to have a conversation with you that was not in my earbuds where I'm like talking back to you and you can't hear me.
It was so nice to see you face to face. This was fun.
Talk to you later.